The bridging of the gap in learning requires a collection of strategies. For these strategies to be effective, the learners, parents, teachers, school, and educational governance need to do their part in ensuring that the gap is narrowed, if not completely closed. How do you check for gaps in students' learning? What are some clues that reveal that there are subject-specific gaps? What are some of the strategies you use to mind and bridge the gaps? Gaps in learning is a constant in education. Finding the best balance of identifying these gaps and bridging them affords students the confidence to progress. Let's explore some of the causative factors of gaps in learning. Children enter the education system from various backgrounds with different levels of exposures and a myriad of priorities. This melting pot of learners quickly establish the variety in learning needs and the stage students are in their development and their achievement when based on the requirement of entry. This is further compounded by the level of support available at home, the ease with which new knowledge is acquired, and the resources available to the professionals guiding and monitoring the students' learning and development. The bridging of the gap in learning requires a collection of strategies. For these strategies to be effective, the learners, parents, teachers, school, and educational governance need to do their part in ensuring that the gap is narrowed, if not completely closed. In some educational systems, students' performance is judged by chronological age, whilst in others it is judged by stages, and students are allowed to progress through the stages once they satisfy the criteria. Within the different world system, some retain students to complete the requirements, whether they are measured by stage or by chronological age. In others, students continue along the learning progression and educators are expected to adapt the learning to meet those learners' needs and combat underachievement. There are arguments for and against both systems and negative stigma attached or associated to them both. Some educators believe that students should be retained until the criteria is achieved before they are allowed to move forwards. Research has shown that when students progress without the fundamental prerequisite for their next level of learning, this in fact widens the gap in their learning because they struggle to access the additional requirements to pass the next stage. This becomes demotivating and increases school refusal or school dropout. It also reduces the percentage of students who will achieve the baseline requirement at the end of their general certificate of education. Some school of thought also believes that it stretches teachers and reduces their effectiveness because of the overwhelming level of needs and resulting poor behavior for learning that they endure or encounter in the classroom. Some people feel that the retention of students could affect their confidence and give rise to anxiety. Equally, educators consider the cost to state-funded education when students are made to repeat a year and how old students would be when they eventually leave full-time education if they had to repeat multiple years. They also explore schools' capacity to house, schedule, and staff an increasing population due to large numbers of students needing to be retained. It is worth realizing that chronological progression education system are the only training and developmental system where students are pushed along without meeting the basic requirements needed to move to the next level. It is similar to a production line sending faulty products along the production line after every quality control checkpoint. On the other hand, many fear that despite clear baseline requirements, that the strategies of retention may be unfairly applied in favor of particular groups. They believe success is dependent on the alleviation of the implicit biases within the education system, so that students are not needing to meet higher covert measures for the same criteria to be met. The argument for redressing the gap in learning and students' progression are many, and there is research that can be used to justify either argument. Until there is a resolution to the ever-present problems facing learners and teachers, teachers will need to continue to find creative ways of educating learners, helping them catch up and bridge the gaps in their learning. Bridging the gaps in any classroom is challenging and requires targeted planning and focused interventions. Bridging the gaps with individual learners requires partnership and commitment on the part of teachers, schools, parents, and students. With the number of students failing to achieve as expected at the end of secondary school, more will need to be done in schools, educational authorities, and classroom to ensure that gaps are identified and additional investment be placed in realizing success for students as early as possible. What are some of the challenges you have with minding the gap and bridging the gaps in students' learning? What approaches do you use to bridge the gaps in your classroom?